Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are, at whatever time it is where you are. What I'd like to focus on in the share is two questions, and we'll see if we'll be able to come up with some kind of answer. The first question is, are the Neiros Hanukkah and the Neiros Shabbos, are they in any way thematically connected, or they are very different from each other? It would appear at first glance that they are very different from each other, as I will explain. And the question is there any deeper connection between them? And the second question is there any parallel between the military struggles and victories of the Hashmonaim with those of modern-day Israel? Might seem like two totally unrelated questions, and it probably is. I don't know. I'm seeing a note here. Nishmat is sending me a file. I don't know. I have no idea what that means. If somebody who ever sent me that note can explain what I'm supposed to do with that, I would appreciate it. Okay. Not for me. Okay. So I would, what I'd like to do is begin with an analysis of some of the halachos of Ner Shabbos and contrast them with some halachos of Ner Hanukkah, and then see where we go from there. So I think I could share my screen. Let's see if it works. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is what I have. Okay. Very good. Fine. So the Gemara in Masechus Shabbos, Daf Chaf Hey Amud Beis, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Rabbi Yishmael in the Mishnah in Madlikin, in the second parak of Shabbos, says that Ein Madlikin be'itran mimnei Chora Shabbos. There's a certain, itran is probably something like, not quite kerosene, because kerosene is a petroleum product. They didn't have it in those days, but probably some kind of pitch or something which is foul smelling, and that's why it cannot be used, as the Gemara explains, my time of why can this itron not be used for Neiros Shabbos? Amar Rabba mitoch shereicho ra, because it has a foul smell. Gzeira shemo yanichen aviyetze, a person will leave the room where the Neiros Shabbos I won't be able to stand the smell, and will leave the room. So Amar le Abai, so Abai says to Rabba v'yetze, so he'll go out, who cares? Let him leave the room. What do we care? So Amar le Shani Omer, Hadlokas ner b'Shabbos chova. Lighting the Neiros on Shabbos is an obligation. The Amar of Nachman bar Zavda, the Amar of Nachman bar Rabba, Amar Rav, Hadlokas ner b'Shabbos chova. Lighting Shabbos candles is obligatory. Now, exactly how that answers the question, we'll have to see in a little while. We'll have to see in a little while. We'll get to that. And the Gemara goes on a little further and quotes also a pasuk about Tiznach from Eicha, about Tiznach mishalom nafshi noshisi tova, that any peace and tranquility was gone from my life, and I had no good. My Tiznach mishalom nafshi, what does this mean? Any peace and tranquility was gone. Amar Avi Avozo had lokas ner the Shabbos, the lighting of Shabbos candles. That's shalom. And therefore, Vatiznach, that is gone. So it's a reference to not having Shabbos candles. In other words, Shabbos candles are shalom nefesh of some sort. Now, Rashi comments on this first statement of Cholva. Rashi says that the idea of lighting Neiros Shabbos is kvod Shabbosu. It's to honor Shabbos. She'ein su'uda chashuva ela bimkom or Ka'ain Yomama. The Suda is only considered to be important if it is eaten in light during the day. So you need light to give importance to the Suda Shabbos. So it's Kvod Shabbos to have Neiros Shabbos burning. However, when Rashi explains the second part of the statement, namely about candles, Neiros Shabbos being Shalom, Rashi there says, Hadlokas Neber Shabbos, he seems to say over there that the idea of Shabbos candles, what's important about Shabbos candles is the fact that they allow peace and tranquility. They make they make everything more enjoyable. You don't fall if you don't have candles, then you'll stumble over things. You'll fall and you'll hurt yourself. So this seems to put Neiros Shabbos more in the category of oneg than in kavod. Because they're two different categories, as we'll see in a moment in the Rambam, that there's a category of kavod Shabbos and there's a category of oneg Shabbos based on the pasuk, the karasa la Shabbos oneg l'dosh Hashem mechubad v'chibadato me'asos d'rachecha v'mtzochem tzecha v'daber davar. So you have the kavod and oneg. I think they're both mentioned. If I quote the right pasuk. But the pasuk mentions both of them. Maybe it's the other pasuk. Im tashiv mishavos raglach asos chapotzecha b'yom kachi v'chibadato me'asos drachecha v'mtzochem tzecha v'daver davar. That's again kavod. Oneg is mentioned as well, but again the pasuk is escaping me right now. The Rambam will say maybe the Rambam mentions the pasuk as well. I think he does. You have karas ala Shabbos oneg v'lekdosh Hashem mechubad. Yeah. So the pasuk is the karas ala Shabbos oneg and v'lekdosh Hashem mechubad, and then the chibadato me'asos d'rachecha follows over there. So there's both kavod and oneg, and Rashi seems to be saying that Neiros Shabbos has elements of both in it. It has elements of kavod Shabbos, but also it has elements of oneg, that it helps you enjoy Shabbos. You shouldn't stumble, you shouldn't hurt yourself, you shouldn't fall. And Rashi amplifies that earlier in Masechet Shabbos as well, in Daf Chav Gimel. I don't think I brought it on these sheets, where he also says the idea that if a person has to eat their meal when it's dark, then they're mitzayir, they're mitzayir. It's uncomfortable for them, and that seems to be more in the category of oneg than in kavod. Now we see the same dichotomy in the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos in Perek Hey, where the Rambam starts discussing Neiros Shabbos. He speaks about Neiros Shabbos as part of Kavod Shabbos. Let's see, what does he say over here? I'm sorry, Oneg Shabbos, excuse me. That lighting the candles is in the category of oneg Shabbos, of enjoying Shabbos, and the chayav levarech, and he tells you that you have to make a bracha. Fine, okay, but he puts it in the category of oneg Shabbos, like you might say the statement of Rashi, the second statement of Rashi, similar to that idea. However, later on, at the very end of Hilchos Shabbos, the Rambam discusses the different categories of mitzvos that apply on Shabbos, and he divides all of Hilchos Shabbos into four categories. Arba'a dvarim nemu b'Shabbos. There are four different categories on Shabbos. Shnayim in Torah, Shnayim in Divrei Sofrim. Two of them are biblical, and two of them are rabbinic. V'hem mefurashim al yidei hanaviyim. Even though they're rabbinic, they're really explained by the Nevi'im, which maybe gives them a little bit of an enhanced obligation, even more than ordinary rabbinic law, because this is actually found in the Navi, as we just mentioned that pasuk. Shabbat Torah, what are the two in the Torah? Zachar v'Shamar. Right? We know Zachar as Yom HaShabbos refers to the positive mitzvahs of Shabbos, remembering Shabbos, mentioning Shabbos, Kiddush, and the like, acknowledging Shabbos with words. And Shamar is refraining from doing all the prohibited activities on Shabbos. Those are the biblical categories. And then we have the two that are rabbinic, v'shenis parshu al yidei hanaviyim, are kavod v'oneg. That, as we mentioned, shenemar v'karos ala Shabbos oneg v'knosh Hashem v'chubad. Then the Rambam goes on to a definition. Ezehu kavod. What is kavod? This is shemitzvah al kol adam lirchotz v'nei. They look nice on Shabbos. You have to wash your face, your hands, and then you have to dress in nice clothing. Mitzaseh petzitzes v'yoshev v'koved rosh. You sit with great seriousness, miyachel lahatbolas, like you would greet an important guest, like you would go out to greet the king. That's how you greet Shabbos. And then umachabe haShabbos sheyilbash ksus nikia. You have to wear clean clothing, and it should be different than your clothes on the weekday should be different. Your clothes on Shabbos should be different. Okay, and within the context of all of this, the Rambam says, let's see, where is it? He talks about, yes. He talks about, the Hener Doluk, you should have a candle burning, the Shulchan Aruch, umita mutzah shekol elu lichvod Shabbos aim. That these are all for kavod Shabbos. So as opposed to the Rambam in Perek Hey, where he says that it is oneg Shabbos, that it's to enjoy Shabbos, to enhance your enjoyment of Shabbos, in Perek Lamed, he puts it in the category of kavod. Here it was as ner hazeh beklal oneg Shabbos. Here he has it in the category of kavod Shabbos. Then he goes on and discusses oneg, and he does not mention Neiros Shabbos. Tavshil Shaming, you have to have a nice, good food, mashka mavusam, and good drinks, things that you physically enjoy yourself. That's how you have oneg Shabbos. So there is kavod Shabbos and oneg Shabbos. And again, in Perek Lamed, the Rambam classifies Neiros Shabbos and kavod Shabbos. In Perek Hey, he mentions them as oneg Shabbos. So we see that the same dichotomy that Rashi has, where Rashi mentions both Neiros as kavod Shabbos in one statement, and then in the second statement doesn't use the word oneg, but he seems to be talking about something like that, that you want to have something to make it pleasant in your house. That's oneg. Making things pleasant is oneg, that you shouldn't stumble on things, you should see where you're going. The Neiros Shabbos serve for that purpose. So we have the same dichotomy in these cases. So it could be that both Rashi and the Rambam feel that there are elements of both. There are elements of kavod and there are elements of oneg in the Neiros Shabbos. But I think it's put more clearly by a statement of Tosfos. Because if we come back to the original Gemara, what were we talking about? The original Gemara that we started with said that you can't use this foul-smelling oil, because then you'll leave the room. And the Gemara says, so what? So you'll leave the room? And the Gemara says, no, because lighting candles is a chova. So how does that answer the question? So light the candles and then leave the room. So Tosfos explained, no, that hadlakas ner b'Shabbos chova is perush b'makom seuda, that the obligation of lighting the candles where you eat is a chova. So if you're going to have to leave the room, you won't be able to eat there. And then the candles won't be, you'll eat somewhere else. The candles won't be in the place where you're eating. The chova hi sheyisod b'makom haner, that you should have your meal in the place where the candle is there, mishum oneg, because that's oneg, that's enjoyment. He has it as oneg. Now, avol, mehadlokas ner gufei lo habaparach Abaye, but the idea of lighting candles itself, that Abaye wasn't concerned about. The pshita the chova, that's clear that that's an obligation, because the Gemara later on says that al shalosh averos nashemesos, it's a Mishnah at the end of Bameh Madlikin, al shalosh averos nashemesos b'shas leidasan, and one of them is she'enon zeros, that are careful about different things. One of them is hadlakas haner. So we see clearly al she'enon zeros b'hadlakas haner that is a chiyuv, it's a mitzvah. So what Tosfos are saying in effect is that there are two parts to the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos. There's A, lighting the candle, and there's B, lighting the candle in the place where you're going to eat. And what, in effect, he might be saying, and this I'm reading into a little bit, I confess, but I think it has validity to it, that the lighting of the candle is kvod Shabbos, but lighting it in the place where you eat is oneg Shabbos. So therefore, we see clearly how the lighting of the candles can be both kvod Shabbos and oneg Shabbos at the same time. You honor Shabbos by lighting candles. It's a chashivos to have light, just because of not because it makes you happy or because you enjoy the light, but light itself adds chashivos to something. It adds importance. Having candles burning is a way of demonstrating chashivos, and hence it is kvod Shabbos. But having them davka in the place where one eats, that enhances the meal, which is oneg Shabbos, and thus it's related to oneg Shabbos as well. That would explain the two statements of the Rambam, the two statements of Rashi as well. That would explain how Neiros Shabbos are both kavod and oneg at the same time. Okay, so this is in terms of Neiros Shabbos. Now, let's look at Neiros Chanukah a little bit. The Rambam, in his introduction to, in his introduction to Hilchos Chanukah, does something which is very unusual. This is pointed out by Rav Soloveitchik as well as by others. He does it in a few places in the Mishnah Torah. As we know, the Mishnah Torah is a halachic work. It's a code. It's a code of law. We could say really a compendium of Jewish law. It encompasses the entire Torah Sheval Peh. And as such, it really is limited to Torah Sheval Peh, but has all of Torah Sheval Peh in it. Occasionally, the Rambam will give you a little bit of historical background. And whenever he does that, there's a reason why he does it. He's not just doing it to teach us history, because this is not a history book. The Rambam does it in the beginning of Hilchos Kiddushin, where he explains how the laws of Kiddushin came to be, what the situation was before the Torah was given, and how it changed after the Torah was given. The Rambam does it in the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, where he explains that the world started to descend into Avodah Zarah in the time of Enosh, and he explains how Avodah Zarah started to slowly, insidiously get into the minds of people, because it wasn't originally there. Because Adam HaRishon knew about God, and so there the Rambam does it. And here in Hilchos Chanukah, the Rambam does it again. And he gives you a whole history. The Vayis Sheni, Kishamalchu Yavan, in the Second Temple, when the Greeks, the Seleucidians, right, were running Kazruk Zeros, I saw they made all kinds of decrees, Ubat Mudasam, they didn't allow them to practice their religion, and they physically oppressed them. Okay, they went into the Beis Hamikdash, they caused damage there, the Timulat Taros, and it was terrible until until HaKadosh Baruch Hu had mercy on us, and we were saved. The Bnei Chashmonai, the Kohanim Gedolim, were able to be victorious and to kill them. Shiu Yisrael miyadav, and Hemilu Melech min HaKohanim, and Chazar Malchus Yisrael Yeser HaMasayim Shanat Korban Hashem. There are a number of interesting things in this, which we'll talk about in a moment, but let's just go through the whole thing. And Kishakavru Yisrael, and then they went into the Heichal. We know the story. They didn't find oil. Okay, and only for one day. And the nace was that it burned for 8 days. And then Neizeh is Kidukach Chachalam Mishavel Sader Sheyushmona Sayamim Mo'elu. They should be days of Simcha V'Halel Madika V'Hem Neiros. Okay, fine. So when the Rambam says Neizeh, he probably is referring to both halachas, not just the second one. He's probably referring to the military victory as well as the miracle of the oil. That Neizeh, because of these things, the Yom Tov of Hanukkah was established. Because also, if you look in Al Hanisim, which we recite, right, there's really no mention of the oil other than obliquely the Hidliku Neiros B'Chatzros Kachecha, and then V'Kavu Shmonos Yemei Hanukkah Elu Lodos La'alel, after we mention the whole victory, the military victory. So it appears that Hanukkah is to celebrate both the military victory and the victory of the Pach Shemen. Now, what's interesting as an aside, and again we may come back to that, if we ask the original question, are there any parallels between the struggles of the Hashmonaim and the struggles of, in modern day, the military struggles in modern day Israel? Well, the Rambam really is describing in Halacha Aleph, he's describing Hanukkah as a kind of a Yom HaAtzmaut, because look what he says. He says at the end, Gavru b'nei Hashmonai, v'haragum, they killed the Greeks, the Seleucidians, v'shiu Yisrael miyadam v'hemidu melech, a king was appointed min HaKohanim, v'chazra malchus Israel, sovereignty was restored to the Jewish people, yeser ad al mosayim shana ad hakorban Hashem. And that seems to be, again, what part of what we're celebrating on Hanukkah is the independence, Chazra Malchus to Israel, because throughout the Vayis Sheni, till that point, there was no Malchus to Israel. We were under the dominion first of the Persians, and then the Greeks, and only at this point was there a Jewish monarchy, was Malchus restored to Klal Yisrael. So it's been pointed out by the Rav and by others that who were some of these malachim were not exactly, these kings were not exactly world-class tzaddikim, right? And yet the Rambam still feels that this is worth celebrating and this is worth observing, even if the kings were not always so great. Many of these Hashmonai kings were not, you're not your paragons of virtue. And yet we celebrate them, and we have a Yom Tov of Chanukah, which is again celebrating our political independence. We see that political independence, even if the leaders are not necessarily the most virtuous, is still in and of itself something worth celebrating for Klal Yisrael. So there is that parallel to the modern day. We'll come back to this a little bit later. Okay. So the Rambam, therefore, is telling us, okay, well, how the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah developed. Fine. And we all know about Neiros Chanukah. We know how we do it. We're very familiar with Neiros Chanukah. We don't now have to go through the halachos of Neiros Chanukah. But the Gemara discusses now, what if you have limited resources and you don't have enough oil or enough money to buy oil to light both Hanukkah candles and Shabbos candles? What are you supposed to do? What should you do? So Amar Rabbi, Pshitali, it's clear to me. Ner Beso, the Ner Hanukkah. A Ner Beso is understood as meaning a Ner Shabbos, the candle for your house, meaning on Shabbos. And Ner Hanukkah, Ner Beso Adif. So Shabbos takes precedence. Mishum Shalom Beso, because of Shalom bias of some kind. What exactly that means is not so clear, but Shalom Beso. Now, let's say you have Ner Beso, the Kiddush Hayom. You have only enough money to buy either oil for your Shabbos candles or wine for Kiddush. So Ner Beso Adif. Again, Shabbos candles take precedence, Mishum Shalom Beso. So, boy, Rabbi, but Rabbi says Ner Chanukah, the Kiddush Hayom. What about Ner Shabbos and Kiddush Hayom? What do you do then if you have? I'm sorry, Ner Chanukah. Excuse me, the Kiddush Hayom. You have Shabbos candles you can buy. You have money for Shabbos candles, and you have some other money left. Are you going to buy? It's Chanukah, it's Shabbos Chanukah. Are you going to buy Neiros Chanukah or oil for your menorah, or are you going to buy wine for Kiddush? What do you do? So says the Gemara, Kiddush Hayom Adif. Do we say on the one hand maybe Kiddush is important? It's more important to Tadir because it comes every week, and we have a rule that Tadir, the Sheino Tadir Kodein, that which is regular is more important. Oh Dilma, no. Maybe we should say Ner Chanukah Adif Mishum Persume Nisa. Ner Chanukah has the element of Persume Nisa, which we haven't mentioned till now, but that is the unstated idea of what the Rambam said and what the Gemara says, that we light the Chanukah candles in commemoration of the miracle, whether it's the miracle of the Pak Shemen, the miracle of the military victory, however, but it's Persume Nisa, it's the publicized the Nes. Maybe that's the most important part of it. And Basar Di'ibai, after the question was asked, Hadar Pashta, it was answered, Ner Chanukah Adif Mishum Persume Nisa. Ner Chanukah is to be preferred because it is Persume Nisa. It publicized the miracle, and there is value to that more than Kiddush Hayom. Now, for the first one I add on, because Kiddush, the bottom line is you can do it with challah. You can do it with challah. And that the Gemara here didn't really discuss. What about if you have no money for a meal for Shabbos? Where does that all fit in this calculus? The Gemara doesn't discuss that right over there. The Achronim discuss all that. So we have the idea over here of a clash between Neiros Shabbos and Ner Chanukah. Neiros Shabbos represents Shalom Beso, and again that could be interpreted as Rashi seems to, but I didn't bring the Rashi over here. It's just also because you feel bad if you're sitting in the dark when you enjoy when you should be enjoying Shabbos. That's Shalom Beso. And on the other hand, because to say it means Shalom Bayis in the normal classical sense of the word, that husbands and wives getting along, It's hard to see how Ner Shabbos really works into that calculus. So that's why Rashi prefers to say it refers to the more general idea of shalom bayis, meaning in the sense of just enjoying the family being able to enjoy their meal together, and in that sense having a sense of shalom. It's a more general shalom of again a family having a tranquil time, an enjoyable time on Shabbos, and that seems to trump Ner Chanukah. In other words, they're two very, very different themes, is what the Gemara is saying. There's this theme of Pirsumei Nisa, which represents Chanukah, and there's the theme of Shalom Bayis, however you'll define it, which represents Nero Shabbos Kavod, Oneg. Again, certainly it sounds more like the Oneg part is being emphasized over here, that characterizes Ner Shabbos. And the two are therefore very, very different from each other. So if we have to stop at this point, we would be saying that the two are really represent very, very different things. However, that's not the end of the story, because the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos, after it raises this question, and again where it appears to present the two as being in opposition to each other, quotes Rav Huna, Harogil b'ner, if a person is careful or regularly performs the mitzvah of ner, and it doesn't say which ner, they will merit, those people who are Rogil b'ner will merit having children who are Talmidei Chachamim, who are Torah scholars. And Rashi elaborates a little bit, as the pasuk says, Ner mitzvah Torah or, that the ner represents a mitzvah and Torah is light. Al yedei ner mitzvah de Shabbos v'Chanukah ba'or de Torah. So Rashi says that the ner that we're referring to here in Haragil, the ner is both Neros Shabbos and Neros Chanukah. Now this would seem to indicate that Neros Shabbos and Neros Chanukah do have something in common, because they yield the same result of children who are Talmidei Chacham. Now, again, just as an aside before, let's not, I'm not really someone who is in favor of promoting sikulos and things like that. I don't think this Gemara is saying that it's a magical formula. You'll light Neros and you'll have children who are scholars. What it probably means is if one adheres to the concepts, to the ideas of Neros Shabbos and Neros Chanukah, if one brings up children with a feeling of, on the one hand, tranquility of Shabbos, joy of Shabbos, and maybe expand that to joy of mitzvahs in general, so then that is a very good likelihood that those children will find Judaism to be a positive experience and will go on and will be motivated to learn Torah, etc., etc. So in that sense, Aragil B'ner Shabbos, we can understand how it will lead to Banim Talmidei Chachamim. At the same time, Pirsumei Nisa of Chanukah, the Pirsumei Nisa of Chanukah, also, if a person publicizes the nace and is always in appreciation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the children see that, they see the way the parents are so appreciative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his miracles, and the parents are telling the children, that will also spur children to want to study Torah and learn Torah as well. So on one level, one could say that, in which case, again, it's not necessarily any commonality other than that the result will be the same. They'll yield the same result. That, yes, but there doesn't seem to be any commonality between them. However, I think that if we look a little bit further, we'll find that there is. Because let's analyze Kavod Shabbos and Oneg Shabbos a little bit. I can do away now with the screen saving, or with the screen sharing. I don't think I need it anymore. So, Kavod Shabbos and Oneg Shabbos, the idea of showing a certain awe and respect for Shabbos, in addition to refraining. In other words, we can refrain from doing mitzvahs, we refrain from doing things that are wrong on Shabbos, and we'll even say Shamar, we'll make Kiddush. But if our whole aura is not one of respect for Shabbos, of Kavod Shabbos, then there's something lacking in our Shabbos. In the same way with Oneg. Oneg is physical. The physical enjoyment of Shabbos really becomes a mitzvah. So it's in a sense taking the physical and turning it into something spiritual, turning it into a spiritual idea, which is what a lot of Torah is about. A lot of our mitzvahs are about that, doing mitzvahs for physical, concrete items and infusing them with spirituality. So Shabbos has that idea of Kvod Shabbos and Oneg Shabbos in very, very great measure. If we look at Hanukkah, the idea of Pirsumei Nisan, and the idea of the wars and the battles, and then after that whole battle, after fighting a battle, then the Nes of Hanukkah occurred. I think that there's a connection between that, and I think that the idea is that the Nes of Hanukkah is showing that the battle that was fought and that all the lives that were lost, presumably a lot of lives were lost, but the result of all of this sanctifies God's name. It creates. There's a nace that occurs as a result of it, a very obvious nace, and it's Pirsumei Nisa for the for all of Klal Yisrael. So there is a commonality between that one, if I can add as well. The whole idea of a great idea, a great part of Greek the approach to life was to glorify the physical. To glorify the physical and put that on a pedestal. We know the idea, the Greek idea of beauty and all of that. They glorified the physical, and the spiritual was not that much of a calculus in their way of thinking things. On the other hand, we glorify the spiritual. We use the physical only as a means to glorify the spiritual. And that's part of the triumph of Yahadus over Hellenism at the time, was that. It's the triumph of our ideas of spirituality over the Greek ideas of hedonism and physicality. And that very much is in line with what Shabbos is all about. Shabbos, we're using the physical. We're using food. We're enjoying ourselves on Shabbos. We have pleasure on Shabbos, but that pleasure is part of a spiritual experience. So both Shabbos and Hanukkah do have that in common. Now, if we go a little bit to the question of all the struggles of Hanukkah and how that relates to our modern times. If we look at the Haftorah for Shabbos Hanukkah, known as the Neros de Zachariah, the candles or the lamps of Zachariah. Zachariah, a Navi, has this vision of a menorah, and it's all related to the very beginnings of Bayis Sheni. It was something that occurred years earlier than Hanukkah, but evidently Chazal saw in there a very deep connection to Hanukkah. It wasn't just the fact that there's a menorah mentioned there, because the menorah there in Zechariah is symbolic of what's going to happen, and the whole Haftarah ends with that statement of Lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach, ki im beruchi amar Hashem tzvakos, which is very hard to understand how that's the message of this menorah that the Zechariah saw, and Yehoshua the Kohen Gadol is standing there on one side, and he's wearing begadim tsoim, he's wearing dirty clothes, and he takes them off. It's a very mysterious haftorah that we will be reading in a few weeks. Incidentally, this year, very interesting. Speaking of haftorahs, we'll have something very unusual. If I'm not mistaken, Hanukkah falls this year on Parshas Vayishlach, instead of, Parshas Vayeshev, Parshas Vayeshev instead of on Miketz, which is very rare. It happens like maybe once every 10 years or something like that, which means that we will get to read the regular Haftarah for Miketz of Vayikatz Shlomo V'nei Chalom, which is very rarely read, and this beautiful Haftarah of Zechariah will be read on Parshas Vayeshev instead, which is Hanukkah. So it's always read then. If we have two Shabbos as Hanukkah, we read the Neros to Zechariah on the first one, and we read the Neros to Shlomo. The story of Shlomo building the menorah and lighting the menorah in the Bayis Rishon on the second one. And the Ran points out, it's quoted by the Beis Yosef and Hilchos Chanukah, that why is it that the Neros of Zechariah have preference, that we always read that one, and the only time we read the Neros of Shlomo are we have two, we have to read another one, but we don't give that one preference. And he says because the Neros of Shlomo were gone and done with. That was something in the past. Neros Zechariah is for the future, something that hasn't happened yet. It refers to our future, what we have yet in store for us. So the Neros of Zechariah, these candles that we are reading about in the Haftorah, really refer to the future. They refer to something that hasn't happened yet. They refer to Lasid Lavo, to Aku'ula, to something of the sort. Well, there'll be this manifestation of Shechina beyond anything that we are that we know. Kiyim Beruchi, Amar Hashem Tzvakos. But every so often, one sees inklings of it. One sees glimmers of it. And such a glimmer was seen when the Bayis Sheni was first built, because after all, you had a rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. After it had been destroyed, it's being rebuilt. This was a glimmer of the Geula HaAsida. It wasn't the Geula HaAsida, it was a glimmer of it. So there was a little bit of that nair, of that or, of that menorah that represents this Geula HaAsida. A little bit of it was found at that time. Then, when Hanukkah came again, this was the second glimmer of Geula HaAsida, with the lighting with the rededication of the Neiros in the Beis Hamikdash, the lighting of them. So again, you have a miracle that occurred. You have a redemption at the time, but it still wasn't a perfect redemption. We were still under the domination of the Romans. It was independence, yes, but it was the kind of independence that wasn't full independence as we see today. The modern state of Israel is Baruch Hashem independent. We have our own government, but we still need other nations of the world. We need the aid of the United States. We need the agreement of the United States. We're not totally free agents in the world, as they were not at the time of Hanukkah either. But the glimmer of Geula was there at Hanukkah. And that is the Neiros of Zechariah, and that's what the Neiros represent on another level. They're Persume Nisa on one level, but Persume Nisa means that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu could do the Nes then, he can do other Nisim in the future as well. The Sha'asa Nisim can also be a Ya'aseh Lanu Nisim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should do, and we want HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do miracles for us as well. So the Haftarah of Zechariah, therefore, is a sort of a window into where Jewish history is headed, but it comes at certain times and then it stops, and it comes and it stops. So really, since the story of Hanukkah, it didn't happen again. It didn't happen because after that, the Romans, and then there was the Churban. There was an attempt with Bar Kokhba. There was an attempt in the time of Hadrian to actually rebuild the Beis Hamikdash that never even got off the ground. And so you never had the Neheros of Zechariah at all. We could only read about it. We could read it as a Haftorah and hope for it to happen until the modern times, when once again, Chazra Malchus Yisrael, that sovereignty has been restored to the Jewish people. And this has a number of different meanings for us. I just had the privilege of spending a few days in Eretz Yisrael last week as part of the RCA. Every week, the RCA is sending other Rabbanim for chizuk purposes. But of course, as we're all saying, we received much more chizuk than we gave in these 3 days. But part of the time we spent with Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon visiting soldiers at an army base, and Rav Rimon gave the soldiers a very beautiful pep talk before, as part of his visit with them. And he explained to them how we are no stranger to pogroms and to suffering and to attack. And he went through all the different ones, starting from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, through the Crusades, and then the Khmelnytsky pogroms and the expulsion from Spain, and you name it, all through till what just happened in Israel now. But he said the big difference is that we today can fight back. We have an army, and you each point to the soldier, you are the army, you are what makes this different today. It's the Malchus Yisrael. It's the government. It's the fact that we have a government. We have Malchus Yisrael. This is what we have today, and therefore that same glimmer of Neros that existed in the time of Zechariah, and that existed in the time of the Hashmonaim, exists today as well. And this is something that we cannot take for granted. We have to appreciate it every day. The same person, when we light the Neiros Hanukkah, I think we have to realize that how much this applies when we say Sha'asa Nisim Lavosenu, Bayomim Ma'im Bazman Hazeh. There are always two meanings in that Bayomim Ma'im Bazman Hazeh. On the one hand, Sha'asa Nisim Lavosenu, Bayomim Ma'im Bazman Hazeh means in those days at this time of year, meaning that's the simple meaning of what we're saying. We're thanking God for the miracles that were done on Chav Hei Kislev, on Chav Vav, on the days of Hanukkah, right? Bayomim Ma'im Bazman Hazeh. But for us today, what it also means is that in these days as well, we are seeing the same kinds of miracles that occurred by Yomim HaHaim. We're seeing Rabbi Biyad Ma'atim, Tmeim Biyad Tahorim, Rishon Biyad Tzadikim, etc. We're seeing all that repeated for us today. And one note on Rishon Biyad Tzadikim. The question is asked, what is this? We understand it's a miracle, Rabbim Biyad Ma'atim, for the many to fall into the hands of the few. And what are the others we say there? Giborim Biyad Chaloshim, the mighty into the hands of the weak. We were weak, not that the people were less strong than the Romans, but they were just less. They had less equipment. You had the mighty Greek Empire with all its military prowess, etc. The Hashmonaim weren't trained for battle. They weren't an army in the same way that they were. So the Giborim Biyad Chaloshim. I don't know if we could say today that we are Giborim Biyad Chaloshim. Our army is much Giborim and is better trained than any other army, but we still need the help of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or Rabbim Biyad Ma'atim for sure. But then you mention that the Rishonim were given Biyad Tzadikim. Now, why is that a miracle? Why can't the Rishonim be given Biyad Tzadikim? What's so miraculous about that? But the answer is that Rishonim are prepared to do many things that the Tzadikim are not prepared to do. The Tzadikim will have restraint. They won't do things that are against their moral principles, and that sometimes makes it harder. When you're a tzaddik, it's harder to win a battle than when you're a Rasha, because a Rasha will stoop to will do everything, and as we've seen, that's exactly what we've seen in front of our eyes today. What Rishonim will do, and what Tzahal will not do. And the restraint and the attempt to minimize civilian casualties, despite the fact that the world doesn't understand this at all. But we see it and we understand that this is Rishonim Biyad Tzadikim, and that's therefore a great miracle as well. But ultimately, the Tzadikim triumph, and the Tzadikim triumph. They triumphed at Hanukkah, and we are going to triumph today as well. This is all part of the modern day miracle of Hanukkah that we are witnessing. So the lesson from all of this, the moral of all of this, is that ultimately the ruach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, lo v'chayil, lo b'koach, ki baruchi. That's the final statement of Zechariah Hanavi in his nevuah. What do you mean lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach? But we certainly need the chayil and the koach. And the same thing could be said. We say Lam Natzeach, Yan Chashem Yotzar. We say Eila v'recha ve'eila b'asusim anachnu v'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir. But we also need the rechev and the susim. But we know that the answer there is what they only have the rechev and the susim. We also have Shem. We have the rechev and the susim too. We have tanks and we have soldiers and we have guns and we have all that. But we also have Shem Hashem. We have Shem Hashem naskir, and this is what it means. Lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach ki ruchi. Not just with chayil, not just with koach, but ki b'ruchi. It's ultimately all because of the ruach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is that's the final line. And I will add and conclude with this, which I think we've all witnessed the remarkable spiritual strength. Not only the resilience of a nation that refuses to to be to go into despair because of all these awful things that are happening. But also we've seen a certain spiritual resurgence, whether you want to call it achdus or whether you want to call it just an appreciation on everyone's part of the role that God plays in this. And I saw it. I saw it with people, whether they were in kippot or they weren't wearing kippot. Everyone wanted the brachot of Rav Rimon. Everyone wants to, feels that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is guiding us and is leading us and is saving us. And that, by the way, I would say is one very important difference between Jews in Eretz Israel, secular Jews in Eretz Israel, and secular Jews in America. That many secular Jews in America totally wouldn't even be able to relate to some of these ideas. If you give them brachos, they'd look at you like, what do you mean? But in Eretz Israel, they relate to it and they feel they have belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu Emunah. It's the triumph of the Jewish spirit coming out once again, and that's what Neros. That's the Rogil B'Ner Havion Tamidei Chachamim. That if we speak about Persume, if we speak about the role of God in history, which is what Persume Nisa is the role of God in history. If we speak about that, if we speak about mitzvahs in a joyful kind of a way, that leads to more and more people adapting it and joining it and joining forces with all of us. So it is. It's my hope, and obviously everybody's hope, that we are able to do more of this, and that the afela which we started will really turn to an or gadol, to not just as we say me'afela la'ora mishibula, we also say me'afela la'or gadol, to a tremendous light, to a light that lights up not only Klal Yisrael but the entire world. There's certainly a way to go for that, but maybe we're on the way. And if we can only preserve the sense of actos that we've done now, I don't know how that's the question. How is this going to be preserved after this crisis is over? And olam kamin hago noeg, people go back to their regular activities. People go back to doing everything the same as always. Perhaps remembering the Neiros of Hanukkah, remembering the Neiros of Shabbos will somehow contribute to keeping all of this spiritual awakening, this achdus awakening with us, and we will really go on to Agula Shlema B'Meirav Yameinu. Amen. Thank you all. Thank you all for participating. Thank you all for listening. I see I have some things in the chats over here. Oh, these are not for me, I don't think. Yeah. No, these are not mine. I was just told that I still have 15 minutes. So I will share with you, not connected with this topic, but I think you might find it interesting. I'll share with you some of the thoughts that I had in shul this past Shabbos, after I just returned from Eretz Yisrael. Just give me a moment over here to see if I can access what I want to get. And I'll talk about this. Yeah. Okay. So Um, our parsha, this week's parsha, deals with parents and children. And I would like to talk about not only parents in the modern day world who have lost their children, children who have lost their parents, fallen soldiers, massacre victims who leave behind widows, orphans, and bereaved parents, but also ancient parents and children. And let me also talk about accomplishments, not just the amazing accomplishments of a nation pulling itself together, but ancient accomplishments. Now, the parsha begins by saying, Eila toldos Yitzchak be'eretz Canaan. Now, literally, toldos are descendants, their offspring. And that's indeed the way Rashi explains. Eila toldos Yitzchak, Yaakov ve'esav amurim b'parsha. Refers to Yaakov, the children of Yitzchak, the children of Yitzchak. But the Sepharno has a different interpretation. He says, Yalde Yomov, the children who were created through his days, meaning his accomplishments, the Korosov and the things that happened to him. Now, what were the actions of Yitzchak? What are these things that are the toldos, if we take the Sepharno, the things that Yitzchak did? Well, the first thing mentioned is that he got married, but that was really, Avraham arranged that. He didn't really do that himself. But what the Torah tells us is Vayetar Yitzchak lenochach ishto, that Yitzchak davened on behalf of his wife. And he was davening because they had no children. And he needed the children just as much as his wife did. And yet he was davening on her behalf because he felt her pain and he was more concerned about her than about him. So he accomplished both tefillah and chesed at the same time. Ben Adam lamakom and Ben Adam lachadeiro simultaneously. And in my 3 days that I spent last week in Israel, I witnessed that. I witnessed a nation where people are concerned about easing the pain of others and people trying to draw and give spiritual strength as well. And here's the scene. Last Tuesday, central Tel Aviv, the heart of secular Israel, a beautiful sunny day. A tent city is set up for families of hostages, and they can come if they want chizuk, if they want material help, if they want counseling, and all of this is done by volunteers, 100% volunteers. No one gets paid. And on one tent, there's a young man by the name of Rabbi Avidan Friedman, an Oleh from the States, was on a hunger strike. He's not related to any of the hostages. He just felt the pain of the families and said, I'm going to go on a hunger strike until either something happens, there's some improvement, there's something changes, or until the doctors tell me that it's dangerous for me to do it anymore. And he was then on day 5, this was on Tuesday, on day 5, and he was able to stand up and give us quite strong handshakes. So I have no idea how long he'll be able to go on. And then the headquarters of all of these volunteers is in a high-tech building owned by a company, Checkpoint. And what this company did was they just vacated 3 floors of their building and gave it over to these volunteers. So this just shows you the kind of chesed that is going on there. Now, why did the Sepharno abandon the simple meaning of toldos as descendants, and instead said it means actions, the actions and the deeds of Yitzchak? Because if you think of it, Yaakov and Esav are not tolodos of Yitzchak. They're also avos. We speak about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as all being avos. They're not tolodos. They are obviously biologically children, but we don't view them as being children. They are all founding fathers. And Esav, we may not like him, but he is Avi Edom. He was the father of Edom. And Yishmael as well, while he's not officially called an Av, Shnei Masar Nesiim Yolid. He will father 12 princes. So he too represents an Av. Now in Halacha, there are 3 kinds of Avos. There's an Av Hatuma, there's an Av Nezikin, and an Av Malacha. There's Tuma, that something which is Tameh can generate other things becoming Tameh. We have Nezikin, categories of things that cause damage. And then we have Av Malachas, the 39 activities, constructive activities, labor that was prohibited on Shabbos, because these are the things that we use to construct the Mishkan. They're constructive activity at their base. Yishmael is an Av, but he's an Av Nezikin. He causes death, destruction, and mayhem, as we saw. Esav is an Av, but he's an Av Hatuma. He for years tried to force us, the Christian world tried for years to force us to convert, to accept Christianity. And if not, they killed us. So it was destruction together with Tuma, all together. That's why Yelech Esav El Yishmael. Esav went to Yishmael, and the two of them together were involved in Nezikin as well as Tuma. Our Avos, on the other hand, are Malacha, constructive accomplishments, to take an unfathomable tragedy and refuse to be broken. On the contrary, to emerge strong and united, that's an Av Malacha. That's doing something constructive in the world. And we heard from a gentleman whose job in the army is to be a milaveh. What that means is that he accompanies bereaved families from the time that they go to the Levaya, through the Shiva, through the Shloshim. He is there at all stages, yard site every year. He says this is something that he will do for life with these families. They will be part of his life. He will be part of their lives. I doubt that any other army in the world has anything like this. This is Av Malacha. This is what our nation does. It tries to be constructive no matter what's happening. We saw how the municipality of Yerushalayim is trying to deal with the children of Sderot's trauma. Many of these children are traumatized. They were in the safe room for hours and hours on end. And they created a play for children written by playwrights, but done with the input of psychologists as to how to help children deal with their trauma, done in a masterful kind of a way. This is Av Malacha. This is what our nation specializes in. And the question that the world has to ask itself, as the Gemara in Bava Kama, after it mentions all these avos and tolados, says, Toldoseim kayotze b'hem, are the descendants like the avos? O Toldoseim lav kayotze b'hem, are the descendants different from the avos? Do they have it's a halachic question, but I'm using it from the point of view of drush. We clearly are following in the way of our avos. We are Toldoseim kayotze. We are following in the ways of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, constructive activity. Unfortunately, Yishmael, much of Yishmael, I can't say all of Yishmael, but much of Yishmael follows the Av. Its Av is Av Nezikin. But they have the power to change. Human beings are not inanimate. Human beings have the power to change. Esav is Yesh Mehem Kayotze Bohem, V'Yesh Mehem Sheinam Kayotze Bohem. Some are like the Esav of old. Some of them still hate us, still want to get rid of us, and others are very supportive. There's always the danger of them slipping back, though. And we have to be on the effort. The rally in Washington was a wonderful effort to keep them away from the Esav of yore. And we have to hope that our Avos Malachos can eventually triumph and will eventually be the model for the entire world. There will come some time when the Nezikin and the Tumah will be gone, and we will be Zocher to the Lashlema Mehera V'Yameinu. Amen.